Traditionally, I think that spring is the best time to sell your property.
People are looking at all times of the year.
Spring's all fresh. I think that's the main reason people sell.
Is spring selling season still a thing, or did COVID blow it to smithereens? Welcome to realTalk, realestate.com.au's property news podcast. It's real questions, real experts, and real insights. And today we're talking about when is the ideal time to sell your property, if there even is one at all. Traditionally, spring is when the market heats up. The days are longer, the grass is greener, the sun is shining, generally your house looks better and more buyers are out and about inspecting property. But is this still the case? We spoke with a few people to get their take.
Yes, I sold a house a few years ago. I would say probably around November. Kind of happened just based on circumstances. I needed to sell it at that point.
We were advised to try and get our townhouse on the market before more stock hit in spring.
To me, it actually really wouldn't matter, because if I needed to buy a house, I would just buy it at any time. Or if I needed to sell a house, I would sell it at any time.
We've sold a few houses.
Yep.
So we always tend to sell them spring because winter's no good. The gardens look crap, and spring sort of everything looks fresh. And the problem with summer is that everything dries out, doesn't look quite as good. Spring's all fresh. I think that's the main reason people sell.
Joining me is Hannah Richards from Buxton Real Estate in Port Phillip, who has been selling houses for more than 8 years, and Eleanor Creagh, senior economist at PropTrack, who has more than a decade of experience analysing the property market trends and insights. Thanks for joining me today, ladies. I think it will be an interesting chat. I mean, the last few years have shown us a lot of ups and downs in the property market and even at springtime. But I guess with things starting to steady, I do wonder whether it will come back with a bang. Hannah, I want to start with you. Why do we call it spring selling season?
I think there's so much excitement about the warmer weather. Definitely here in Melbourne, we're all exhausted come end of winter. It's so exciting to see spring start to hit. People get excited, want to be out more.
With a hot market, how many auctions would you typically see per weekend?
Super Saturdays, we could fit in perhaps 8 to 9 auctions back to back on the hour.
Wow.
Yeah, it's quite intense.
Oh my gosh. Well, it's an interesting one because I think prior to the pandemic, spring selling season very much was the thing. Like you just said, Hannah, the lead up is 60 to 90 days. People spend a lot of time during winter getting their property ready. But the 2022 market did see a downturn overall, not just in spring, but the whole year. Eleanor, now that we're halfway through spring this year in 2023, how is it shaping up?
It's certainly an interesting one. So the last few years have been very, very different because we've been impacted by all of those pandemic-related restrictions, and then we had the overhang of the pandemic. So 2021 was really a record year for property markets, and we saw that lockdowns reduced vendors' willingness to list, which played into some of those exceptional price rises. But that really changed in late 2021, and new listings hit multi-year highs in spring. So new listings in the capital cities actually reached their highest level in a decade in November 2021. And that continued into the new year of 2022 as a lot of people kind of made up for all of that lost time. And January 2022 was then actually the busiest January for new listings in a decade. So people were expecting that interest rates would rise later on in 2022, and that probably generated a bit of urgency from sellers. And then after that very fast start to the year, we really saw activity kind of tapering off. And last year, spring was, unseasonably quiet. So interest rates certainly were rising at that point, and they were rising at an incredibly fast clip. So we were seeing interest rate rises of 50 basis points per month. It was, the fastest interest rate tightening cycle in a generation. There was quite a lot of uncertainty around where, future borrowing costs were going to be, where the market was going to go. And I think a lot of people held back, both buyers and sellers, and activity was really, really dampened by those factors. Now, this spring is, again, quite a bit different. We really saw activity surging in August. And nationally, new listings were up a little over 20% month on month. And Sydney and Melbourne both recorded their busiest end to winter in more than a decade. It's been a bit of a mixed picture now heading into September. So we have seen that strength in August has eased off a little bit. And it's a mixed picture across the capitals. So we're continuing to see strength in new listings volumes in Sydney and Melbourne and also Canberra, but it's a little bit different in, say, Perth or Brisbane, where new listings volumes are, say, down on last year's listings volumes.
at the time of this recording, we haven't had another rate rise for, I think, 4 months. So what's changed to get Spring back on track this year? Is it just that rates aren't rising, so maybe it gives sellers a bit of a confidence to go to market, Eleanor?
I think there's a number of factors. So we're certainly seeing that I think both buyer and seller confidence is on the up. You know, as you mentioned, interest rates have been on hold for 4 consecutive months. Now that brings a little bit more certainty around, I think, what the future's going to hold. There's a lot of talk that interest rates have peaked. We think they likely have. Also, after 9 consecutive months of national home price growth, so positive price growth, that's probably drawing both buyers and sellers off the sidelines. We know that housing demand is stronger, so home buying demand in the market is stronger. Sellers are likely kind of taking advantage of that. We've got that strength in net overseas migration, very tight rental markets as well. You know, don't forget that a lot of current market participants, so buyers and sellers in the market at the moment, will anchor their expectations based off of momentum over recent months.
I want to pick up on what you said there about the price rises, because there has been 9 consecutive months of price rises this year. Hannah, as an agent, are you seeing that these price rises, along with, I guess, a little bit of a hold, 4 months in interest rates, do you think this is giving faith to potential sellers who were maybe on the fence last year?
Absolutely. It's definitely giving more confidence back to the market through buyer and seller, absolutely. Just that certainty that when they buy a property or sell a property, the interest rate's going to be exactly the same by the time they settle.
And so how does this spring 2023 feel different from an agent's perspective to spring last year?
I have to definitely agree. We had our strongest August in years, like absolute years. And I feel like spring is really delayed this year in our marketplace in Port Phillip. I think we will still have a strong finish to the year, but I think it's going to be delayed as in December, January, February. We're going to see some typical spring numbers come through.
What does a strong August look like?
Well, usually August is the end of winter. We're on holiday. We've taken time off, school holidays. It's usually an okay month, but everyone's not selling in August. They're selling in September, October. So to have a huge August really took us by surprise.
What sort of numbers are you doing though? Is it, 4 auctions per month, 5?
Yeah, we listed and sold a property a day.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Throughout Port Phillip and our 2 offices. So
yeah,
that was really good. It was a very busy time.
I'm interested, Eleanor, in which parts of the country are seeing the most new listings this spring. You mentioned it briefly before about how the capital cities are really getting on board, but how does it actually look from a numbers perspective in other states?
Yeah, it's certainly interesting, and it's definitely a mixed picture. And I think, as Hannah mentioned, we did see that really busy end to winter with new listings volumes really surging in August. And I think probably some of the drivers of that uplift in listings activity into August was the fact that the listings environment was pretty subdued throughout the first half of this year. So we kind of mentioned how that was one of the contributors to the turnaround in home prices that we saw beginning earlier this year. But of course, that subdued listings environment throughout the first half of this year, people were looking at, oh, look, the year didn't shape up quite how we thought it would. Prices are on the rise. They've continued to rise throughout winter. So that's probably contributed into that surge that we've seen in August. Now, we have seen that strength has continued in September, so into spring as the selling season's kicked off in Sydney, Melbourne and Canberra. So it really is predominantly Sydney and Melbourne, though, that is seeing the most activity with respect to new listings volumes at the moment, whereas the situation is quite different in Brisbane, in Perth, also in Adelaide. And that's meaning that market conditions are actually probably a little bit more competitive in those markets as well. So not only have new listings volumes been a little bit more constrained, but also the total stock on market in those capital cities also remains pretty constrained. So it's well below prior decade averages in Brisbane and Adelaide, and hovering around record lows in Perth as well. And, that's one of the drivers that's playing into home price growth that we're seeing in those capital cities, with home prices in all those capital cities clocking a fresh record high in September.
We did speak to one person who has some opinions on whether they think spring selling season still exists.
Whether spring selling season still exists, it certainly does exist, because I know there is definitely an increase of properties on the market in spring still, and it's clear to see that more stock tends to pop up at the time of the year, but whether it should still exist, I'm not so sure, because life circumstances change. They need to buy, they need to sell all year round. To be holding off just because you want to hit the market at a certain time of the year is not necessarily, I think, the right pathway to always take. They might think that it's actually they're going to be selling at the best time of the year, but in reality, they're putting their house up and putting themselves in competition with far more sellers.
It is interesting because all these numbers that we're talking about suggest that spring selling season actually does still exist. But when you talk to the average person, I mean, life circumstances dictate when you sell and buy a house. And you know, if you are getting married, or if you're getting divorced, or if you're having a baby, or whatever your circumstance is that you need to change location, those life changes don't hold off because the season is summer. And the life changes don't hold off because, it's not spring yet, so we can't do that. Hannah, what's your patch in Melbourne's Port Phillip area doing? Like, where's hot, where's not, where's shaping up for a good spring?
Yeah, I definitely have to agree with you there, Alice. Like, within the Port Phillip marketplace, seasonal factors just don't apply. I've got a new family member arriving, I've lost a family member, I'm changing jobs, etc. I need to move. To answer your question, what we're seeing in the marketplace, it's always popular, are the buyer demand's always high for, say, an Art Deco, an older block, something with a bit of period features. Perhaps they're 1 in 4 apartments, always well received. We always meet huge buyer numbers when we put those properties on the market. The ones that don't fare as well or aren't as popular are the kind of investor stock, you know, the big high rises, 200 in the block, you're one of many, high OC fees, etc. So most people typically will look for those period features, perhaps something with a courtyard. It fits our lifestyle more, especially after COVID. We're just not willing to budge on certain factors of our lifestyle in fear of perhaps being locked in again. But, you know, we want our property to make us happy. We spend so much time within them. We're no longer willing to compromise on those factors.
Yeah, we've just talked about so much change over the last few years, a lot of spring listings to a decrease, to a resurgence. And it does bring us back to the original question and the topic of this episode. Does spring selling season still exist in a post-COVID world, or is the property market all year round now? I'm really interested to know, Hannah, what your thoughts are on whether we might see a new season pop up as the time to sell. Like, January feels a little bit weird to me, but over the last couple of years, like, you had an exceptionally busy winter. Is there any other point that stands out to you that you thought, wow, we weren't expecting that?
Usually we would take most of our leave in January. We wouldn't start back up till after the Australia Day long weekend. Typically everyone's down at their holiday houses. It's just not the market that you'd be like, let's launch 1st of January, get ahead of everyone. But at the moment, after what we've gone through, I think it is a really popular time. People have caught up over Christmas, over barbecues, plans have changed, perhaps new jobs, new schools. Let's get ahead, less competition, and get onto the market ASAP.
And Eleanor, what about from an economical point of view? Is there anything in the past couple of years from that surprised you about houses selling as a whole across Australia?
It's certainly interesting, you know, and kind of thinking about that question, will we ever see a different selling season take over, or does the spring selling season still exist? I think there are always going to be differences based on other prevailing conditions. And we've certainly seen that exemplified over the past couple of years with the pandemic-related restrictions, you know, interest rates rising at the fastest pace in a generation. But I think generally, markets do continue to experience those seasonal effects, and it is a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. So we've done some analysis on kind of those seasonal effects, and it is certainly true that the warmer the state is, the less variance there is in terms of those seasonal effects. And seasonal effects are stronger in, say, Sydney, Melbourne and Hobart. Now, there's probably a number of reasons there. So the auction season, particularly prevalent in Sydney and Melbourne. The weather is nicest and properties are going to look their best, anecdotally. But again, you know, it is also that self-fulfilling prophecy side of things. So if sellers end up withholding those homes that that are nicer for spring, then those times are also going to appear more favourable for buyers looking for those perceived better options. When we look at the prices that properties fetch over the year, properties also generally sell for a higher price in spring. So it certainly is self-reinforcing. So we've done some analysis, and that shows that properties sold in November actually received the highest average price when we isolate those monthly effects, and that the end of the year is certainly the best time to sell with respect to achieving the highest price, so October, November and December. So again, feeding into that kind of self-fulfilling prophecy idea. Of course, there are always going to be life circumstances that take the lead, but I think sometimes people kind of lean into those, I guess it's a bit of an old wife's tale, so to speak, but if you're going to be leaning into that, then yes, those life circumstances can take effect, but you might find that you hold off anyway.
A prediction that you made, Eleanor, about spring selling season in your latest article on realestate.com.au is that Melbourne and Sydney would see the largest amount of listings, and the numbers are proving that that's true. You also said, though, that there would be more choice for buyers as well as more bargaining power. What do you mean by bargaining power?
Yeah, so it's certainly an interesting one. So if we think about it just kind of simply, the nuts and bolts, if you've got more choice for buyers and, more listings hitting the market, then technically, potentially buyers are going to have a little bit more power at the negotiating table. So instead of kind of, just for argument's sake, there being maybe one or two properties that they're interested in that fit their preferences and needs and wants, maybe there's going to be kind of 3 to 5.
Are you seeing that, Hannah?
Yeah.
More bargaining power among people who are looking for a property?
Well, it's basic supply and demand. So if there is only 1 or 2 properties that they're interested in, they're going to pay more to get into that property, especially if they've missed out. But when there's 3 or 4 options, it's like, well, this one fits, but so does that one down the street. So which one am I going to pick up for the better price?
And you're seeing that at the moment in market?
Correct. Yeah,
okay.
absolutely.
So yeah, that's really interesting.
Isn't it?
Yeah. Is this a huge difference to what you've been seeing, I guess, previously?
Well, in August, it was completely different. There was the right amount of supply and the right amount of buyer demand to pick that up. And they were turning over very fast for great prices.
Yeah.
Now that we've got more property coming onto the market, it has diluted that pool a little bit.
I feel like a couple of years ago there was such, and when prices peaked in 2021, it was almost like there was buyer desperation. People were just so keen to get into the market.
Literally.
And they compromised on
It's called FOMO.
Yeah, but it is. Like,
was.
What Eleanor spoke about just now, your needs and your wants and what your preference is in a home, I found definitely in my network, people were compromising on that a lot because there was that FOMO, there was that, oh my gosh, there's too many buyers, there's not enough demand. Do you see that in the market?
We definitely saw that in 2021. 2022 was fear of overpaying. So we went from fear of missing out. Oh my God, I have to get into the market. Interest rates are so low. As soon as they started cranking, it was like, I'm not overpaying. Call me when you've got an offer. I'm like, why would you want to compete with another buyer? Well, it shows that market value is there. What I'm prepared to pay, they're prepared to pay too. I don't want to overpay to get into this property. 2023, we're seeing a lot more supply come through. We're seeing a very even market, a very even playing field. And that reflects in, the auction clearance rates. That reflects in how many buyers we're getting to the property and how many offers we're getting. The vendor and the buyer are meeting in the middle. It's very fair at the moment.
All right, so this fair market that we're coming into, or this year, has that ebbed and flowed based on the season?
Yeah, not so much based on the season, just based on those life circumstances. It's untypical for us to have such a big August, but we have.
Yeah.
Quiet September. Are we going to have a really big November, December, January?
Yeah. Well, that actually leads me to my last question, which was, are we starting to return to a normal market after the peaks and troughs from 2020 to 2022? But I feel like we've actually just answered that question in that what is a normal market?
What is a normal market?
Like in lieu of a crystal ball, I don't know if we can predict whether we are coming into a normal market because of these peaks and troughs, because of the unseasonable August and the maybe a little bit quieter spring. What are your thoughts, Hannah?
I think coming into end of year, it naturally is a good time to think about the new year, where you're going to be. Do we need new schools, etc.? Do we need better accommodation? Perhaps are relocating for work. So I do generally think the end of the year should see a very strong finish to this year and set us up for hopefully a great 2024.
Eleanor, what do you think about us coming into a normal market? Do you think that normal markets, and as they were traditionally with those season cycles, do you think they still exist anymore?
They probably do, yes. And I think when we're looking at, are we kind of returning to a normal market after the ups and downs and ebbs and flows we've seen over the last few years, probably the answer is maybe somewhere in the middle. We're getting there, but I think we do still have a number of unusual drivers, right? So we've had quite a bit of or a higher level of economic uncertainty maybe than we have had in previous years, pandemic aside. Inflation is still very high. We're coming off the back of the fastest tightening cycle ever. And all of that, of course, followed what was an incredibly disruptive 2-year period, which was the pandemic. And now we've got migration back at record high levels. We've got rental markets across the country are incredibly tight. So there are all these kind of unusual push-pull factors at the moment. But I think overarchingly, the trends are showing that maybe we're returning, or we're getting there. We're on the path back to kind of that normal or more normal market environment.
Well, I guess whether or not buying and selling will change in the future, and, you know, we're not quite back to that normalcy yet. But for now, it just feels like our post-COVID world doesn't rely so much on these cycles due to strong buyer demand, due to seller confidence, due to a lot. It's multifactorial, as we've discussed today. But thank you so much for joining me, both of you. I hope you've had fun, and I do hope that this has given sellers and buyers confidence to kind of get back into the market.